or the week after. And then as you emerge a brighter and better person in 2024, we'll begin on January 10th, 4 days after the Epiphany. There's a lot of cool stuff going on at St. Albans right now. I know we have people who are part of different churches, but I do encourage you to go to our website or check our social media for all our Advent and Christmas stuff. We have an Advent dinner tonight at 6 p.m., a chili cook-off, so there'll be at least 14 different chilies to try if you're a chili connoisseur, and I'll be speaking about finding God in surprising places, including not in Switzerland, but in the Pointer Sisters. Yes, Carrie. It should be, yeah, I think so. Yeah, live streamed and recorded, I think. So that's tonight. My talk begins at 7, dinner's at 6. There's children's and youth programming at the Slippery Minnow. So, just kidding, it's not there. It's at a person's house in Woodway. So if you have questions about that, let me know. The other thing, just to mention, is that the week that, because I won't be able to tell you because we won't be meeting, but on January 7th, which is a Sunday, we have our Epiphany celebration with camels and cocoa and all that in the evening. So 5:30 p.m. Epiphany service in the church, and then followed by camels and cocoa in the courtyard. So we like alliteration here at St. Albans. And then another, as a sort of a somber yet hopeful in the resurrection note, the funeral for Tommy Bundren is today at 1:30. As you know, he was a faithful member of this class for many years. Let's jump in, but before we do, as always, it's good to pray. So the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty God, as we study your word, we ask your help that you illumine it for us, that it would speak to us where we need to hear it. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen. So where is David? Do you remember? You feel free to, it's an open book test. Feel free to look back. What's that? On the other side of the Jordan River. Yes, that's right. He's in the country that would now be called Jordan. He's on the other side of the Jordan River. Anybody want to shout out the city's name? I know, you might pronounce it wrong, and then I will judge you. So, yes, it is in Mahanaim. It doesn't go by that name anymore. If you were to go there today, this is what you would see. So that is the Jabbok River, and that it's an S-shaped curve in that river. If we look at the map here, this is a close-up of that region of Israel. You can see Jerusalem at the bottom near the Dead Sea, and that river valley is the Jordan River that goes from Sea of Galilee in the north all the way down to the Dead Sea in the south. So that's the Jordan River. On the map that you're looking at, on the left side is the nation of Israel today, and then on the right side is other territory. Now, today it's the country of Jordan. But Mahanaim, it's kind of hard to see, but it's on the Jabbok River, which if you think of the Jordan River running north-south, there's all these little kind of tributaries that go into it. This is a tributary of the Jordan River. It's another small river called the Jabbok River. And that's where David is camped out and hiding in that city. This city of Mahanaim, as I said, is on this S-shaped curve in the river. That's a pumping station that's currently there. It's for irrigation, but there's sort of two mounds on either side of the river. One was the city of Mahanaim. The other was the city of Penuel. Any Old Testament nerds that Penuel made you think of something? No? Okay. It's Genesis 32, and that's where Jacob famously camped out at night and where he met the angel, or a Old Testament appearance of Christ, some would say. So that's where Jacob rested the angel, the stairway to heaven, all that sort of stuff happened at this spot in Genesis 32. There were two camps or two cities that sprung up on either side of the river, Mahanaim and Penuel. They are now called other things, but those two cities on both sides of the river gave the name of Mahanaim. Mahanaim means two camps. And so that's how that city got its name. It's also where Jacob met Laban and made a covenant. All kinds of important things happened here. It's also a city where Ishbosheth reigned after the death of his father, King Saul. We talked about Ishbosheth a long time ago. He was the one after Saul died that wanted to be king because he was Saul's son. So this was across the Jordan River. He set up this alternative attempt to rule Israel. So a lot of important things happen here. It's always good to know kind of, I don't know about you, but when I read city names in the Old Testament, I fall asleep and then I wake up and then I continue reading. But when you look at what's happened in the place, sometimes you get some real insight, and we'll talk about that later. But yes, Gail. There's still cities in those areas, not anymore in the same locations. You know, there's a lot of places in the Old Testament or in the New Testament as well where there was a city there. For example, Paul writes to the city of Corinth. Ancient Corinth is a ruin, but if you move a few miles over, there's a new city of Corinth there. And so there are cities near these areas, but they have different names and they're not in the exact same location. Human settlement, yes, has continued in that area, but not in the same. These are mostly archaeological sites now, where those places were. Okay, so that's where David is. Why do you think he picked this spot? It's near water? Yeah, great. Near water, 100%. What's that? Yeah, to hide. He's in a canyon. There's this canyon at this river. And also it seems that the people that are there are friendly to him. If you remember from last week, they gave him lots of raisins and graham crackers and the peanut butter and the celery with the raisins on top of it. They gave him all these great things to take care of him and his men, sleep number mattresses, all the things that they wanted to recover and rest and recharge as they were on the run. And so that's where we are. We begin today in this spot. So just good to keep that in mind. And also, as this map helpfully notes, you may be wondering, why does it mention the forests of Ephraim? Well, you're about to find out why the forests of Ephraim are important. So we begin. Verse 1, and we're going to read through verse 18. Then David mustered the men who were with him and set over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. And David sent forth the army, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai, the Gittite. It's my band name, if I ever form one. Ittai and the Gittites. The king said to the men, I myself will also go out with you. But the men said, you shall not go out. For if we flee, they will not care about us. If half of us die, they will not care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore, it is better that you send us help from the city. The king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood at the side of the gate, while all the army marched out by hundreds and by thousands. The king ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard while the king gave orders to all the commanders concerning Absalom. So the army went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was fought in the forest of Ephraim. The men of Israel were defeated there by the servants of David, and the slaughter there was great on that day, 20,000 men. The battle spread over the face of all the country, and the forest claimed more victims that day than the sword. Absalom happened to meet the servants of David. Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a great oak. His head caught fast in the oak, and he was left hanging between heaven and earth, while the mule that was under him went on. A man saw it and told Joab, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak. And Joab said to the man who told him, what? You saw him? Why then did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have been glad to give you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. But the man said to Joab, even if I felt in my hand the weight of 1,000 pieces of silver, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, for my sake protect the young man Absalom. On the other hand, if I had dealt treacherously against his life, and there is nothing hidden from the king, then you yourself would have stood aloof. Joab said, I will not waste time like this with you. He took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak. And 10 young men, Joab's armor-bearers, surrounded Absalom and struck him and killed him. Then Joab sounded the trumpet, and the troops came back from pursuing Israel, for Joab restrained the troops. They took Absalom, threw him into a great pit in the forest, and raised over him a very great heap of stones. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled to their homes. Now Absalom, in his lifetime, had taken and set up for himself a pillar that is in the king's valley, for he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. He called the pillar by his own name. It is called Absalom's monument to this day. Here endeth the lesson. All right, what jumps out at you? What seems odd or interesting? What questions do you have? What do you observe in the text? A painful way to die. Yeah, and a little humiliating. Yeah, I have this for you. This is a painting from the late 1700s by a Spanish painter. You can see the mule taking off, Absalom, his very tiny feet dangling in the wind in that oak tree, and then, of course, Joab coming up, showing 1 spear, but as the text says, well, you can see actually 2 spears still in Joab, and then he's casting the 3rd one. Very, very dramatic. And he's on a noble white steed, contrasting to to Absalom's mule. But I don't know. Joab probably had a mule too. The mule was like the common thing for a king in those days. And just remember Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a mule, sort of that symbolism there as well. So yeah, it's a awful way to die, to be trapped, to be sort of hanging by your head in an oak tree with no one to come get you, and you're just kind of waiting to die. As you can see, although it doesn't say in the text, Jewish and Christian tradition have long held that what is happening here is not his sort of head getting caught between branches, but as you can see, his hair getting all tangled. So let that be a lesson to you long-haired people. When riding a horse, don't go under the oak tree branches. Be careful, wear a helmet. But do you remember how Absalom's hair was described in previous chapters? Luxurious, Fabio-like. They said if you cut it, it would weigh like 30 shekels or something. It's this beautiful, long head of hair. Probably a little prideful of it. So yes, this is definitely what the text is trying to communicate. He is, one of my father's favorite phrases, he has been hoisted on his own petard. The thing that was his glory and his pride has now become his downfall. It's a humiliating way to die, sort of a silly way to die, and yeah, there's certainly a lesson in there. Yeah, what else strikes you about this passage, or what questions did you have? Well, yeah, they did not honor David's request. Well, one person tried to, another person didn't. Yeah. What? He didn't even get named. His words were recorded, but not his name. Yeah, for sure. It just says a man saw it. Yeah. Well, yeah. Let's back up and talk through this text. So we begin with David mustering his men, thousands and hundreds. They each get commanders. So David is seen as this really gifted military strategist and organizer. He is not wasting any time. He knows battle is coming. He's just gotten the news that Absalom and his men are coming. Now, if you recall, what was the discussion in the Situation Room in Jerusalem with Absalom and his advisors last week? There were 2 different suggestions, one from Ahithophel, one from Hushai. What was the first thing that was suggested? Do you remember? Feel free to look back. Ahithophel, yeah.
He wanted to attack at night or whatever, surprise them, and fill in while they were weak and tired.
Yep.
And Hushai said, "What's the one that convinced them to hold off?"
Yes, yeah, and so and there was one person, Ahithophel said, don't send this person. Hushai said, yes, send this person with our troops. Do you remember who that person was? Well, Hushai was the one giving advice, contrasting Ahithophel giving advice. So they both were giving advice. One person said, you should take this person when you go. The other person said, don't take this person when you go. Who was the person? It did start with an A. So Ahithophel, yes, was the person giving advice, and Hushai was the person giving advice, and they had contrasting advice about another person who should or should not go with the troops to attack David. And it starts with an I. It was Absalom. It was the king. Ahithophel said, Absalom, you stay home. We don't want to risk you. Really, we just want to go after David. So let's take a surgical strike force, the SWAT team, the Navy SEALs, or whatever. We're going to go and we're going to get David in the dead of night, and after that, it'll end this whole conflict. Your reign will be secure. Nobody will challenge you, and all the people that have been following David will come back to you, home to Jerusalem happily. And Hushai, who was a plant from David, intentionally gave bad advice. And he said, no, don't do the surgical strike. The full force should go, and we should do a big attack, a big campaign, kill as many Israelites as possible, or David's servants as possible. We want to sort of get revenge. We want to stick it to him. We want shock and awe. And Absalom, you're the king. You should go, and you should take the glory for yourself. And Absalom said, that sounds great. I like the part about me being glorious. I also like the part about slaughtering lots of people, because I want to stick it to them. I don't, and you can see a little of this, and I, one must be careful about superimposing present-day events over ancient things. But if you think about this country after 9/11, one could have argued for a small surgical, let's just take out the ones we know are bad. But instead, we launched a full-scale war in two large countries that lasted for 2 decades, and one of them just ended. Of course, Iraq, a huge campaign, hundreds of thousands of our troops, and Afghanistan, hundreds of thousands of our troops for years, and that we just went through from. So, we could have said, let's keep it small and targeted, or we go big, and we went big. And there was a lot of political appetite for that at the time. I mean, it was definitely conflicted, but there was a lot of people that said, we got to, under several presidential administrations, so this is not a partisan who was right, who was wrong sort of thing, but just to say that often when a nation is attacked, I think you can see this with Israel right now after October 7th, there is no political will among the majority of Israelis for a small response. It's like we're going to go in and we're going to have a very big response. And so you see some of this here. Obviously, the United States was holding back to enter World War II until the Japanese attacked at Pearl Harbor. And then it was overwhelming, full response. 2 theaters, the Pacific, Europe, etc. And so I'm not saying whether one is right or wrong. I'm just saying when Absalom was faced with 2 conflicting options, one small surgical response to just take out the leader versus an overwhelming campaign to really stick it to him, he went with the overwhelming campaign. And that seems to be a very typical response of human beings in situations like this. So that's what's happening here. So Absalom joins them. David knows what's happening because there's been some intelligence gathering. There's been some spycraft, and he knows what's happening. So he responds not just by sitting in his hands and being passive, as David has done. We've seen a little bit of passivity, but here he's in his element. He's a good military strategist and organizer, so he gets his army in order. We also get the sense that this is a pretty big group that has fled Jerusalem with David. So he's not some ragtag, small band of misfits. This is not the Magnificent Seven. This is like the Magnificent 70,000 or something. There's a lot of people with him. And he divides it up, his army, into 3 kind of main divisions: Joab, Abishai, and Zeruiah. And the other thing we learn is that there's some choice. Since David can position his men where he wants them to be, he decides not to stay down in the valley, in the canyon, because that would be sort of a trap. He decides to engage them out in the open, but not really out in the open, because where does he go? The forests of Ephraim. What's that? Yeah, well, it's a little bit different now, but yeah, there was definitely a forest there now, and you can see indications of that now. And he uses he's sort of on the defensive here, and so he gets to pick where he is. And by the way, if you've been following the conflict in Ukraine, Russia now on the defensive, Ukraine on the offense. It's much harder to be on the offense than to be on the defense in war. So Russia had lots of time to plant mines and dig trenches, and it's really hard to break through that once a defensive position is established. And that's what you see here. They can sort of establish their position, use the forest to their advantage. David's loyal men have fought with him for years in the desert, in the wilderness, in the forest, in the open country, in the rocky country, all the places. So these are very skilled fighters, and David picks the terrain to his advantage. And so it's to run at a forest that's full of enemies is hard. They will be able to strike you potentially before you strike them. There's lots of hiding places, all that. And it seems like pretty treacherous country because, as it says in verse 8, the battle spread over the face of all the country, and the forest claimed more victims that day than the sword. So whether that's, just the kind of the treacherous terrain, who knows what's in that forest? But clearly it was bad news for Absalom's troops. So let's back up a little bit. David divides his army into three groups under Ittai, Zeruiah, and Joab. And David says what in verse 2, at the end of verse 2? I'll go with you. A good leader always that goes out in front. I'll be with my troops. What counsel is he given? No. He's like, and why? What reason do they give? He's worth more. He's like the most valuable prize. They don't care about anything except for David. And they say if you go out there, it's like basically taking what they're fighting to get and putting it right in the front for them to take it. So, nice thought. We appreciate the gesture, David. Duly noted. Let the minutes show that David really wanted to go. But, no, stay home. And what instructions do they give him at the end of verse 3? Send help from the city. Yeah, if you stay down here, maybe you can send us resources. You can continue to supply us with equipment or food or whatever. You have a role here, but it's to stay back. And I think this indicates some real wisdom. So David's response is what? Okay. Unlike whose response? Absalom. Absalom was told not to go, and then somebody else said, no, you should go. He said, yeah, I think I will go. Yeah, it sounds good. So you're meant to see the contrast here, and there's something here about different styles of leadership. There's a book entitled Good Leaders Eat Last, meaning make sure you protect your people, not exalting oneself. Some people think leadership is about, getting the Lincoln Town Car to pick you up in the airport, always having the best reservations at the hottest restaurants, always having the best seat at the table, and all that. And if you've ever served under a leader who was into the trappings of her or his office and sort of walked around like they were better than everybody, you know how uninspiring of a leader that is and how that actually backfires. You want to serve them less. You like them less than if you have ever served under a humble sort of servant leader. And I think, again, there's a lesson here about that kind of leadership. So the king stood at the side of the gate, we read. Again, a reference to the fact that this city, Mahanaim, is a walled city, like all cities then. City gates are the places where kings or judges would sit to hear if there's some sort of legal case to be settled, something like that. You remember in the story of Ruth and Boaz, that's where they go to the city gate to have all that legal dispute resolved. If you go to Israel and you go to the ruins of ancient walled cities, many times outside the city, you will see by the gate a little dais, a little platform where the throne would be set or the chair would be set and the person would sit there. And you see in front of the throne there's always these two little round cylinders about this high with an indentation in the middle of them, and because that's where the two posts were set, that you could then have a little awning over the person's head. So they would sit there at the city gate, and so he's sitting there watching, and they're standing, it says, and they're all marching out. So he would have been, I mean, it's sort of like a military parade. And he's reviewing the troops. They're going out. So they all see him. So he's showing, I'm with you, even though I'm not going with you. I care, and I'm going to be staying behind to help you and send supplies if needed. But what does he say while he's there so that everybody can hear? Take care of the young man, the Na'ar. We've talked about that word before. Take care of the young man, Absalom. It's a sort of a term of endearment. He's not that young of a man anymore. He's certainly a full-grown man. He's also a traitorous, betraying coup leader. And David sees him as this little baby boy in his diapers and just playing in the nursery, and which I think any parent can relate to that. We tend to not want to see our children in their flaws and all that. But David takes it to sort of new heights. You know, he wants you dead, David. He's stolen the kingdom from you, David. He's not a great guy. Hot-tempered, betrayer, all these things. But David asks for mercy for him. And I'm a big fan of mercy, and I like that. But if you are the troops, you might hear this, and it might strike your ear kind of funny. Here we go to risk our lives for the man who's kicked us out of Jerusalem, and we have to fight him now because, David, your house wasn't really in order, and you'd sort of checked out. This thing developed with Amnon and Tamar and Absalom, and so you sort of were contributed to this mess, and now you want us to protect the guy that's at the root of all this. It might have felt a little, well, do you care about us too, David? But he asks this and everybody hears it. And so they go out on this campaign. I don't know what that is. Let's ignore it. Okay, so I have another picture. This is a painting. It's hard to see because it's such a large painting and the screen doesn't really do it justice. But this is a painting by Gustave Moreau, a French symbolist painter of the 1800s. This was painted in the 1870s, and he did similar paintings in different media. This is oil. It's about 5 feet by 9 feet, something like that. It's in the Hammer collection, which is in Los Angeles, but it's on loan right now in the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. So if you go to Houston in the next few months, you can check out this painting of King David. And here, it's him at the end of his life, sort of. He's sitting there on his throne, long gray beard, and not the young, vigorous David of Michelangelo and attacking Goliath. He's tired. He's weary. The person at the bottom, you can sort of see, there's this thing there. You can see the top of it in this close-up. That's the muse. That's because David is famous for playing the lyre. The muse is below his throne holding the lyre in this painting because David is sort of, he's tired, he's worn, he's not playing the lyre anymore. And the muse is sort of bored with nothing to do because David is in this sort of funk at the end of his life. And we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. And I think there's something, the grief of David, which is really going to hit a fever pitch next week, but we've already seen him go through so much trial and loss and all that. The child that he had with Bathsheba was lost. He's lost Amnon, who was bad. Tamar is sort of essentially lost. Absalom has betrayed him and now is sort of dead to him. Just a man who has so much loss, and just the weight of that as he bears that, I think is really captured in this painting. So think, that old Shakespearean phrase, "Heavy is the head that wears the crown." The crown is this ridiculously large thing in this painting, and it's weighing on him. So I think it captures a lot of David's mentality as it's beginning here and will continue. So his troops are going out to battle. He's not saying, "Go get them, like today we will have victory." It's not a St. Crispin's Day speech, another Shakespearean reference, It's not that at all. It's like, make sure you protect the enemy. And it just shows the grief, the loss, how that's weighing down on him. And this painting to me captures that. So if you get a chance to go to Houston, you can see that painting and take it all in. So they go, they fight. It's Gettysburg, basically. I mean, it's just this awful, bloody battle. 20,000 men are slaughtered on that day throughout the country, throughout the forest, and it's awful. It's awful. And this is David, the best king that Israel was ever going to have. And this is it's now kind of his rule it started so gloriously, now it's disintegrated into this civil war that is just claiming the lives of thousands of men and is just awful. And these are people of the same, I mean, they're all Israelites. They're all part of the chosen people of God. And I always come back to this, when people are surprised about how folks in the church don't get along, I'm like, well, these are the chosen people of God. And look at what's happening here. And it's just, the cycle repeats itself over and over and over again. You think the church board meeting or elder meeting was bad. Well, look at this. So, verse 9, Absalom happened to meet the servants of David. Whenever you see that in the Bible, something happened to happen, and it's almost presented like a coincidence. It's never a coincidence. It's always the biblical text sort of winking at you, because the writers and the readers absolutely believe that nothing happened by accident, that there's God behind everything. So this is another one of those long passages where there's no direct mention of God doing anything. But this is the author's way of sort of winking at you and saying that God is still involved here. So Absalom happens to meet the servants of David. And that's just another interesting thing. It talks about Israel versus the servants of David. They're all part of Israel, but the servants of David are how the author is describing the loyal people on David's side, and Israel is seen as kind of the bad guys almost in this situation. So Absalom happens to meet the servants of David. Absalom, riding on his mule, gets stuck in the oak tree, and he was caught fast, hanging between heaven and earth. And this is a literal description. His feet aren't on the ground. He's just hanging there. But it's also a description of the limbo of David's kingdom. I think David's own mental state. I think even Absalom's political state. Is he king? Is he not? It's just and this is one of those images. The Bible is great because it has things that are literal images, but also metaphors and symbols. And there are certainly times in life where we feel like we're caught hanging between heaven and earth. We are in this in-between state. We're stuck. And think about him. I mean, you can move your body all you want, flail your arms, kick your legs, cry out and scream, and he's completely powerless to do anything to change his situation. I hope you don't feel this way, but if you ever do, hopefully what happens to Absalom won't happen to you. The mule, there is also some dark humor in this. This is, people say the Bible's not ever funny. This is kind of funny, darkly funny, but funny. There's a Three Stooges element to this. And you see this kind of thing in cartoons, where the person's riding a horse and gets stuck and the horse keeps going. And this is the mule keeps going, and there's Absalom, this great pretender to the throne, wants to be king. We learn at the end, again, a deep ironic thing. He's erected a big monument to himself. But I guarantee you, nobody makes paintings of the monument. But there's lots of paintings of Absalom with his hair cut in a tree. And so there he is. The man sees him and doesn't do anything. Doesn't try to help him. He doesn't know what to do. And he just goes and tells Joab, I saw Absalom. He's stuck in a tree by his hair. And Joab's indignant because Joab is the clear-eyed military leader that's not distracted by any of David's psychological drama or family problems. He knows what needs to be done. And this is an enemy that's tried to take the throne from David and should be removed. And so Joab is like, I can't believe you left him hang. Why did you? And what reasoning does the man give for not doing anything? What's that? Yeah. Yeah. David has already sort of undermined the authority of his leaders and said this thing, part possibly damaging the morale of the troops. But they got the message. Protect Absalom. Even though he's the enemy, even though he's the one that's trying to kill me and destroy my kingdom and your livelihood, protect him. So the man heard that and took that. The words of a leader have impact. He says, so if I had, I heard David say not to hurt him, so I didn't want to hurt him. But also, if I had hurt him, what would have happened? What's his reasoning in verse 13? Yeah. So you see how David's commandment has now kind of muddied the waters for decision making. He says, I heard David say not to kill him. I kind of know I should kill him, but I heard David say not to kill him. And if I do kill him, you know what will happen is the king, David, will blame me for that. And you're just going to stand over there like kind of, filing your nails, checking your email, and just let me take the heat for this decision. Because David, so it's, again, if you are in any sort of leadership position, there's a lesson here about thinking through your words and the impact they have. I can see this in my position, but if you've been in leadership, there are things that I care about, and if I care about those things, it kind of makes everybody else care about those things, sometimes in unhealthy ways. If I'm anxious about it, it makes other people anxious about it, and so my work as a leader is to try to not be anxious and to be clear, but hopefully not create anxiety in the system. But you see this happening, how David's psychological anxiety is now translated out into the people around him. And it creates this dynamic where the man is sort of looking out for himself. Just as David prioritized his needs over the feelings and motivations of his army and his generals, this man, that spreads through a system. If you think about Jesus' words, a little leaven works through the whole dough, a little bit of yeast affects the whole batch of dough. You see this here, David's, as the leader, his mentality and mindset sort of infects the whole thing. And Joab's over here is like, what are you doing? Joab's like the one guy that seems to be immune from this stuff. And so he also, by the way, I love that he says, I would have given you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. I have no idea what the significance of the belt is. I don't know if you've been given a belt as a gift. It's usually seen as a loser in terms of the gifts categories, the belt, unless it's a nice belt. Maybe it's a really nice belt. Yeah, maybe you put the silver on the belt. You can sort of walk around, hey, everybody, check out my belt. Yeah, Kelly? Yeah, it's probably some like military insignia. Yeah, I would have given you a sash, like a bandolier, some more epaulets, a medal. Yeah, that kind of thing. So, but he says, no, I wouldn't do it because I heard what the king said, and left me hanging. I had done it. So, Joab, what's Joab's response? You're wasting my time. I love it. Joab is so clear-headed. If you've ever felt like you've been dragged into a conversation where you can't win, and you go around and around and around, and sometimes someone who is in an emotionally mature and healthy place refuses to engage with the insanity. And here, Joab refuses to engage with the insanity, and he says, I will not waste time like this with you. It takes 3 spears, wants to make sure he gets the job done right, and thrust them into the heart of Absalom. So he really, it's a big thing. And then, just to be sure, 10 young men, 10 Na'arim, Joab's armor bearers, kill him. They strike him and kill him. So he's apparently still alive as these 3 spears are in him. And then these 10 other men finish the job. So definitely much more thorough than the previous man who found Joab was. And then Joab sounds the trumpet. Basically, battle's done. Like it's over. Call the dogs, put out the fire, come home. And they what do they do next with Absalom? What? Threw him into a pit and do what? Cover him with stones. So there is some respect shown here. There's a desire to bury the dead with some dignity here. And meanwhile, all the Israelites fled to their homes. Now, the Israelites does not mean David's people. That means Absalom's people. Fled to their homes. That's you don't think of people just running to their houses. This is a 30-mile journey. They've got to cross the Jordan River. There's a long way to go. But they basically turn around and desert the battlefield. They realize it's over. And they also realize what their fate might be, which is they're the losing side. That's right. So usually the losing side is dealt with pretty severely if you try to defeat the king. Look what happened to Yevgeny Prigozhin when he tried to defeat Putin, and a few weeks later he died in a very mysterious airplane crash. So they know so they get out of Dodge, they flee, and then we have this little coda to the story, this little kind of epilogue, which just again makes it even more tragic. Absalom, we learn, had maybe foreseeing the likelihood of his death, and he didn't have any children, who knows why, but he says, I want to be remembered, so I'm going to put this pillar up in the Valley of the Kings, which of course is not there anymore, and just because I want to, he's a man so concerned with his legacy, and like I said, this is how we remember him, not because of his great, Washington monument to Absalom. So the things that I would put to you to kind of take away from this, a little thing on the importance of place. Mahanaim is where Jacob met God and came away from that with an indelible reminder of God's presence in his life. And I think, it's not nothing that this battle takes place near that place. And the way that God works in the lives of people, the way an encounter with God can often leave you, in some sense, changed. Jacob was, he limped for the rest of his life. There's something to that. And here David is in the same spot. And the whole, Jacob's name became Israel because Israel means wrestles with God. And I think David is definitely someone who's wrestling with God a little bit throughout his life, but especially following the Bathsheba incident, just the consequences of his sin. So places matter, and I think the author here wants us to note that we often end up a little scarred sometimes from our encounters with God and our own wrestling with God. That when Jacob doesn't yield, he wrestles with the angel all night long. He never gives up, and he's marked forever with that encounter. And here David is seen as wrestling with God as well. So the importance of place, good counsel and humble ears. David gets good advice, and he can actually hear it, which to me, that is so hard for people to do. People in your life have given you good advice, and you did not take it. I have been given good advice, and I didn't take it. I know. I'd much rather hear the story where I'm the hero, and where I know everything. Even to take advice indicates that you don't know everything. And I don't like being the guy that doesn't know everything. I know everything. I always know what's right. So asking for advice and then following through with it. I'm always very careful. I hope I'm always careful. I'm probably not sometimes. But when people ask for advice, I get nervous because I'm thinking in my head, even though I tell you what I think you should do, you're probably not going to do it. And sometimes I feel like subconsciously people are asking me for advice so I can tell them what they know I'm going to tell them, and then they will not do that thing, meaning they'll go against my advice, and then that gives them an excuse to sort of, I don't know. Sometimes people self-sabotage their relationship with the church, not because of me or any other pastor, but often there's a whole projection thing going on. And anyways, I think there's something, though, here about David, who is a very conflicted and mixed person at this point in his life. He still has some of this humility where he's able to hear what his counselors tell him. There's a lot here about the futility of human planning. David's own attempt to build his kingdom has now crumbled, but I think even Absalom, this picture of him caught with his hair in a tree, says a lot about the human condition. And here he is with all these troops, great plan. I mean, it's sort of like the Bay of Pigs, right? And history is full of examples like this, where you go out with some big plan, you're going to do this thing. There was some really short-lived video service that came out, I think about 3 or 4 years ago. I even forget the name. It was like Hubu or Fuli or Juju or some these weird company names that mean nothing now. And it was billions of dollars from really powerful companies and investors. It was going to be the next YouTube, and the whole idea was we're just going to show short videos. Super Bowl commercials rolled it out, and it lasted like 6 months. Not everything is like that, but a lot of things are like that. I met a man who was 92 years old. This was last month. And I was giving a talk somewhere, and he came up to me, and he said, I'm 92 years old. I've been very successful in business. I've been very successful in politics, and I see that it's all now BS. I was just sort of struck. It's not the kind of thing you hear that much from people. Most people are like, I'm building my empire, and I'm going to be great, and it all is so significant. And a lot of life is not that significant. A lot of life is pretty futile. And that's not to say that we shouldn't have our jobs and take care of our children. I think it's a matter of perspective and priority, and kind of realizing the fleeting nature of life. The Bible compares humans to grass in the field that springs up quickly and then tomorrow is thrown into the fire. This is not to be a downer, but I think to me it can be a freeing thing. Sometimes when you don't realize the brevity and uncontrollable nature of life, you think you have more control than you do, which leads to stress, anxiety, and fear. But when you know life is short and you're not really in control, sometimes that can be freeing, and you can do things that you maybe for some reason thought you couldn't do before. Maybe you try new things. Maybe you make some changes. So this is kind of the warning that Absalom, I think, gives us about life. And finally, just you see the persistence of sin's consequences. Just if you think about David's sin with Bathsheba, and that as being the pebble that's dropped into the pond, and just the ripples that go out from that over and over and over, and how there seems to be some thread here with David that he sort of checks out as a father, whether it's the grief from the loss of the child with Bathsheba, the shame and guilt over his sin. He knows he's forgiven. He wrote Psalm 51 about that whole experience, but I know lots of people who know they're forgiven, yet they can't forgive themselves, and so he carries this with him. His guilt over what's going on with Absalom, all of that weighs on him and is shaping his psyche. And I think you see all that continue to play out in huge geopolitical ways. I mean, there's 20,000 men dead on the fields and forests of Ephraim, and this is kind of playing itself out time and time again. I mean, you think about someone, it's sort of an extreme case, and I get it, and you're sort of told not to ever use this as an example. You never talk about Hitler, but Hitler, this failed painter that dealt with all this rejection, his own psychological profile was not good, and he looked for some validation in the world and found it, but the amount of insecurity and brokenness in him demonstrated, again, not to justify, but just to note that many people who don't deal with their own stuff have it come out in all kinds of ways. There's a political power couple in Florida right now that's in a lot of hot water because there's a big sex scandal, and they're like the face of them is this. They're very conservative people. The wife started a group called Moms for Liberty, raised a lot of money for conservative causes. He's the head of the GOP in Florida, and it turns out there's a lot of skeletons in the closet, and it's all coming out, and the police are involved, and let's be nonpartisan. Let's also say, look at Hunter Biden, a lot of stuff going there politically. I'm just trying to offend everybody today. It's what I'm trying to do. So here's Hunter, a man with addiction issues and all kinds of brokenness in his own family and his life, and clearly some really bad decisions about how he wanted to use his family name, and his financial dealings or all that, and that's all coming out now too. And I think there's human beings, the folks who are not in that very harsh, judgmental spotlight, we tend to look at those people and think, oh, those monsters. And I think there's a failure to recognize sometimes that everybody we call a monster, we could be that person. And the only reason we're not that person is because we don't have a high-profile job. But we absolutely do have skeletons in the closet. And that those skeletons are not there because someone woke up one day and said, I want to be a terrible person with really questionable morals. Most people think of themselves as pretty good people who have time and again made some bad decisions, but there was a reason for that. And it's, it all comes back to your origin story and your psychological makeup and your family and all kinds of things. That we are really weak, scared children, most of us, trying to avoid pain and avoid rejection and get some sort of feeling of love and belonging. And we make all kinds of suboptimal decisions, often unthinkingly, to get that. And I just see David's life. It's easy to sort of say, oh, he was good and now he's bad. And he is a human being. And every human being's story has elements of this kind of stuff. And so you see all that kind of trace itself out. So when I say the persistence of sin's consequences, I'm not saying like, you better be good so Santa gives you a reward. I'm saying the really muddled nature of what it means to be a human is seen in David's life, and you see how those things play themselves out. And I think the one little bit of hope I take away in all this, because this would be really sad to end there, is if you look in this painting of David, what is behind the throne? Not on the right side. Yeah. There's a lily. And a lily is a symbol of what? Christ. And why is the lily a symbol of Christ? Do you know? Why do we put them on our altars at Easter in particular? Because the lily comes back every year. It's a symbol of resurrection. The lily dies and comes back. And this is the painter putting Christ in the background here. David, his life is ultimately, in terms of a human sense, something of a failure, or at least there's a lot of failure in it, we can say. And that's why Jesus comes as the son of David, the final son of David, to deal with the things in David's life that no amount of political power, military success, wealth, and riches could ever deal with. So it's to say that there needs to be a deeper cure, and this, to me, like many of the stories of King David's, points to Christ, and that's what Gustave is trying to do in this painting as well, Gustave Moreau, to point us to hope. And this is the hope to which David ultimately would look, and you see that in the Psalms. Jesus quotes them a lot, David's Psalms, looking for the Messiah. David himself knew that he needed more. And so those are our big takeaways from this lesson. So as you head into Christmas, and you see lots of examples of the futility of human planning, when the meal that you're preparing burns, or the perfect family Christmas is not that, and someone gets drunk and says things they shouldn't, or the gifts that you hope to get, you don't get, and the gift that you think is going to be great, they'll love it, they don't like, you give them a belt and they're not a huge fan of it. Whatever all this stuff happens, just remember the little lily in the background. This season is about Jesus coming into imperfect human lives. His birth is imperfect. This was not Mary's birth plan at all. To be born, to have to go to Bethlehem and to pay taxes and to then go into labor, and there's not room in the house. So the brokenness is everywhere, and yet, Christ is born. Christ comes always to love imperfect human beings. He seems to not be able to get enough of us. God actually does seem to love us. So remember the lily in the background. Think of it when you look at your Christmas tree, that tree is an evergreen because it's a symbol of life that won't die. You don't have a maple tree for your Christmas tree. You have an evergreen, another symbol of the resurrection and new life. Even when the leaves are falling off all the trees around us and the nights are long and dark and things are cold, we have this brightness, the light of the world. And the darkness has not overcome it, as John's gospel says. So let's end there and say a prayer, and we'll see you again in 3 weeks. Dear God, thank you for the beauty of your coming to us in our time of darkness. And we pray as we look at the story of David that we would be mindful of the places in our own lives where we need you to arrive and to help us where we can't help ourselves. We pray that you give us what we need, not because we deserve it, but because you love us. We pray this in